obligatory, rather awkward wait of about 1 minute to see if any Twitch ads are playing, and nobody can actually see this because I don't know how it works. I don't watch very much Twitch. Hello, everybody, if you are there. It is episode 47 of the Code Zone. That's very exciting, and we're going to continue today developing my versatile Swiss Army knife editor-like thing. Now, we've already got some people in the chat. We've got hello, Standard In, hello, Magetsa, hello, Technic Gel, hello, Bo Nainu. I quite like that name, Bo Nainu. Yes, so let's just get stuck in, I think. I think all of the ads have probably stopped playing if people are already typing hello, or they've got interesting technology interfering with the adverts. First time chat from 10 gigahertz. Hello. So, in the time spent since last week, as I mentioned last time, I'm not going to do all of the dev live because there's just too much to do and not enough time to do it in. So I have actually made some progress. And Infinite Coder 1, hello. Pliskit, hello. Let me just bring you up to speed with the features and things that I've added. So we started off with basically nothing. We just had a blank form. And I've really only worked on two features so far. The first, we saw the editor, and I showed some WX widgety things to try and make it look a bit more modern. And to that, I've added a general purpose logging tool, because I figured these sort of things, you need a log. Sometimes things goes wrong, sometimes your users want to know what's going on. And because later on I'm envisaging introducing scripting into this environment, having some sort of message relay system and capture system I think is quite a useful thing. We've got Mouse, hello, Gruffler, hello, Bixie, hello. We were just saying, Bixie, I think I need a theme tune for CodeZone. Just hint, throwing that out there. We'll see. And as well as the log viewing tools, I have created sort of the very first stage of an asset loading and management tool. And I'll demonstrate these in a minute because they look a lot nicer when they're not in WX Form Builder, but in the normal running environment. But WX Form Builder allows me to construct this scaffolding of components and controls all in the right place. So here I abuse these list controls. Now, WX Widgets has list boxes as we know them, but if you want them to be a little bit more flexible, a little bit more modern, well, say modern, I'm talking like 30 years ago, then you can use list controls to give you a bit more versatility there. And everything is all sized and relative sizing. The idea is I can tell I've got absolutely no plan here, and I'm going to be refactoring this as I go along. It was determined at the end of sort of last week's show that we need some way of managing assets, sort of a way of knowing what assets we've got to work with in order to create levels, create other resources, whatever it is that the editor ends up doing. But fundamentally, all of this imagery needs to be loaded onto a GPU, and that has to happen somewhere core to the application. So that's where we're starting. Bournemouth Julian, hello. Yes, nice to see you again. And so I created a utility to allow me to sort of explore assets. So at the moment it's a glorified image viewer, but it's quite a nicely integrated one in terms of generating an asset pack. And it also starts to demonstrate why I want to do things this way and how we can add some utilities to it. Now, the title of this stream says Asset Viewer and Tile Selection, so I'll talk you through the asset viewer and look at some of the code, but I'd also like to get started on a general purpose tile selection tool. So this is a way of, once we've got an asset, how can we select things from it in order to use them in developing levels and things. We don't actually have the concept of a level described anywhere yet, so we can't actually paint any tiles, but coming up with some good foundational tools I felt was useful, and I've had to do that in order to generate this asset viewer. What was this panel? Oh, that was this panel, the one we're looking at. Who have we got here? Annie, hello. Alta, hello. Slice, hello. Good to see you all. Yeah, half an hour late tonight, just life got in the way. So I thought rather than starting at about 8:15, which was more appropriate, I'd round it to the nearest half an hour. It seems fair. The Dr. Octo, hello. Right, let's get going. So let me show you where we got up to. I'll find my environment. So I added some files. Do you know what? Let's just run it first, and then we'll talk through. So here it is so far. This is the application. I'll just make it full screen, and it doesn't remember its sort of window layout or anything just yet. And it's in light theme. Do you know what? I'm going to keep it in light theme. In fact, I'm going to try and make it brighter. I think that that's how you're going to stand out these days. So on the left here, I have a list control, which was the one we saw in Form Builder. And on the right, I have my viewing screen. Now, it looks like it says col in all over the place. It's actually OLC, and we'll see why that's relevant in a minute. It's there to allow me to see transparency in the imagery. Is it just me, or is Twitch being quiet? I had to boost my receiver to understand. It looks like my levels are okay at this end. I'm actually slightly clipping a bit on one of them, so yeah, I think we'll be all right. You learnt STL from my videos. Hey, no problem, Gilgamesh 43499. And thank you, Cypherpunk, for confirming that. Yeah. Light grey or white font as well, please. Do you know what? Why not? Huh? If only WX Widgets allowed you to set the font universally enough. Anyway, that's another grumble. I've actually found a few bugs with WX Widgets, and I was contemplating actually reporting them to the WX Widgets guy, because, it's a responsible thing to do. It's an open source package that I use and abuse, and I was surprised to find some bugs, and I'll show you one of them later. Anyway, on the left here of my layout, this is going to be some sort of project structure layout, tree-like thing, but also it's going to be some tools. And I've not quite decided what they're going to be, but I've just left the space for them for the time being. And here on this list, we're going to have our assets. Thank you, Gobsmack Goose, for the follow there. Let's load an asset. So I'm going to click this button, Add New, down here, and we can see there's an asset up here. So it loads it into the environment, and I can use the middle mouse button to pan and zoom it, and I can zoom in, and I've deliberately sort of shown a 1 pixel boundary around the image too. I can change properties on this. So if I select this here, I can change its name to blue asset. And you can see it's actually quite real-time and interactive. It's changing the size of the columns in the list and things. So it's quite a nice thing to see. Now, what we see here is the slot number. Maybe that needs to be a little bit wider there. The slot number, the friendly name of the asset, the size, because I think it's often useful to know what the size is. And if we wanted to see it, we can see the path to where that exists. What is the file in which one? Hang on. I really hope if you can make learning tutorials for new devs like me. We'll be getting back there with some videos soon. We can also change the file itself. So let's change it to something else. Now, everything that you see rendered on the screen is rendered by the hardware, so it's all very smooth and fluid. I'm not using any of the built-in GDI stuff or the WX Widgets drawing tool. It's all completely custom code. In fact, it's more or less Pixel Game Engine 3 that's doing this rendering for us. So it is actually quite slick and fast. And the viewer allows you to do things that normal image viewers don't do. So you can really sort of get in and analyze what's going on. And I added some buttons, one to show the actual size in screen pixels of the image, and another to fit it to the screen. There's a little bug there with fitting it to the screen and the aspect ratio. We'll worry about that in a minute. We can also do this as well. This is pretty cool. So if we've got lots of assets that we want to add, which I've got a nice pack here, I can select them all and click Open. And we have to wait for it to add them all. There we go. And it's added all of the assets in one hit. And once they're loaded, actually navigating through them is very quick. So it's a convenient... Oh, wow, that's loud. I need to turn down my... totally deafened me there. Thank you, Jinson. That's very kind of you for the subscription. Right. I've completely lost track of what I'm doing now. So yes, we can see that the loader is outputting messages to the log here. In fact, if I try to load something that's not an image format that it understands, it will actually spit out an error. But I found that what we often want when we're creating sort of 2D games, for the sort of scope of things like the Pixel Game Engine. Remember, the idea is not to create a Pixel Game Engine tool here. It's a general purpose tool. Is I want to be able to now export this information in a variety of different formats, and I'm going to do that via plugins. So I need to define the interface to all of this very accessibly and robustly. and then allow people to write Lua scripts to interact with that. So they can output it in JSON, they can output it in the format for their own engines, they could even output C code or C++ code or whatever code, Python, it doesn't have to be, whatever it needs to be that it's convenient for them to use. And that's, in a nutshell, what this tool is all about. It's to save doing the laborious bits and just have a nice way to sort of interact with your assets and your tooling. Technic Gel didn't even hear anything. Just the first time catching the stream, been watching on YouTube for years. Yeah, been a bit quiet on YouTube. Why was that quiet for everybody else? It shouldn't have been. I'll put the desktop audio up. And hopefully the next time there's an event, you can all get deafened by it as well. Yeah, I've been a bit busy for the last couple of years, unfortunately. It's just life getting in the way. Although I'm finding some time again, hence CodeZone has restarted, and I'm now building applications. So we're getting there. We're getting there. So this represents really a pack of things that your game will load. Now, this slot number, this is what we were talking about. This is quite important because the order you load your assets can fundamentally... Oh, there we go. Garbage Town just subscribed. Hopefully that wasn't silent. But it didn't deafen me this time. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. The idea is to load these in a specific sequence because that's how most game engines will need things to be done. You don't want to, in your game, be using the friendly name and a hash map all the time to access every single resource. Sometimes that's appropriate. So what I'm intending to do, and I've not thought this through properly yet, is to actually map this slot address to whatever the GPU calculates at real time that's required to be. Because this resource pack could be one of several sources of resources required by the end user. So I'd rather map this number to another number than mapping the friendly names to numbers. So there's going to, I've not thoroughly thought this through yet, but that's sort of the direction I'm going in with it. Still no sound. Still no sound. It doesn't say that it's muted. Don't know. Yep, don't know. It says it's capturing the desktop audio, and it certainly showed it. Never mind. It's incredibly distracting, and it's the notification sounds that have been on Twitch since Streamlabs began. So that shows you how how up to date I keep these things. Right, so this is my asset viewer. It's quite nice. Let's load some more assets. Let's have a look. So if I go to up one here, so I get most of my assets from like humble bundle packs. Let's pick Super Mario here. So that's added it to the bottom of the list. Scroll down. There it is. So this is the Super Mario World asset pack. And it's nice, this one, because we've got some transparency in it. So we can start to see that this background, like most image editors, it's there really just to give you some texture that contrasts the transparency. It's quite a useful tool, particularly if you've got sort of translucent pixels as well, which I don't think any of these sprites will have. We can turn that off and just look at the raw sprite sheet if you need. And you can also see now the 1 pixel boundary around the image. One of the things I wanted to make sure was, let's say you've got a sequence of assets which could be like an animation of individual frames. I'm just going to pick on these. As you're moving around, it would be tempting to sort of always reset the view to show the whole asset each time. But if you've got frames of animation, sometimes you might actually just want to pan backwards and forwards like this. So I thought that was a more useful way of displaying the asset. And again, because you can sort of transform the asset in interesting ways, that might help with how you want to construct it. You've got to think about what the creative uses are for this sort of thing. So that's the asset viewer. Oh, I wanted to try and load something that might not be an image. So let's pick something like this file here. Oh, yeah, so it said, and we'll see the log even colors it. Isn't that nice? Could not load that particular file. I thought that was quite a nice feature to have. Let's add some more assets. It's always interesting looking at assets. But I've got quite a few. Let's see, fantasy cards pack. Hope all of these are appropriate for streams. I've no idea. I've got so many. Oh, yeah. What is this? Oh, that's quite nice, isn't it? Look at that. But this is a really high definition one. Look at it, 22813190. At least the viewer is capable of handling that resolution. Very nice. The rotation's quite nice because it rotates around wherever your mouse cursor is. There's some interesting maths behind that to get that to happen. So I rotated around its eye. But the thing for me was I often like to just sort of oh, I've lost my image. Where are we going? It's on screen. There we go. Now let's just straighten you up again. I probably should put in a cancel rotation button, shouldn't I? That'd be a useful thing to have. There we go. And maybe I do need a homing button just to centralize it all. So these are all wish list features. But I often find, yeah, Windows Explorer is not a great way to sort of see lots of images at a glance. And now I can create packs of them ready to go. It's just be a convenient way of searching through things. And however we load them, don't know yet. We're going to have this export function. All of this undecided. I'm going to have a quick glug. Based on the affinity photo scrolling, moving and panning. Yeah, I'm always a middle mouse button fan. Now I know that doesn't work very well on laptops. So there might be some key commands you can hold down and drag the mouse to achieve the same thing. Those sort of usability improvements, it's easy to take them for granted now as being, yeah, oh, I'll get round to that later. But actually, they can really make the difference for certain people. Touchpad gestures, so pinch to zoom, it depends how your operating system is configured to understand pinch to zoom. Mine on my laptop will actually emulate that as a scroll wheel, and it understands right and left click, as you well know. You know how laptops work. So I've not implemented the move up and move down functions yet. Now there's some problems here. This is the order in which I intend to load the assets later on. If you start to move the assets around and they're represented via IDs rather than explicit files and things, then later on, let's say you've got a level that's designed with a certain tile pack, moving the asset around will completely corrupt what that level looks like. I don't think there's a sensible resolution to that. At some point, you have to take control over what you're doing and be responsible for it. Right, I'm not going to load all of these images because there's absolutely loads there. Let's go back to this one. So if I pick Wild Arms, good RPG. Ooh, double click there. So you could define your level with an asset pack like this, but if you accidentally change this one for the Mario one, then you'd have RPG levels made out of fragments of Mario, which is an interesting game dynamic, but probably not what you actually want. So yeah, asset viewer, good. Log is working, and that's as far as I've got. So I've also tried to make it reasonably error robust too. Right, so could it be a unique identity? Could it be? Yes, it certainly could. We could create some sort of hash. The trouble is you don't know what you're sharing that with. So instead of having a slot here, what you're suggesting is that some arbitrary UUID is generated in the background, which is used to link across all of the different things. Well, potentially I've kind of got the friendly name for that. At the moment I can allow duplicate friendly names. Again, protocol and rules I've not really decided on. So maybe, yeah, putting some sort of hidden UUID in the background is not a bad thing. The alt is useless if it's zooming by default. Oh yeah, you like holding the spacebar to pan. Keyboard rotation. Well, I do my keyboard rotation by holding Control and using the middle mouse wheel. I don't know where I got that from. I just like it. For me, it's very intuitive way of doing rotation. You'll notice it's pixelated. That's an active choice too. Of course, I can load all these images with filtering applied, but I choose not to because ultimately this is the image and it's pixely stuff is what I do, right? So keeping it fairly pixelated is fine. But perhaps I do need an option to load up whether that's filtered because that's not something that's typically Well, actually, that's not true. Depending on who's using it, but if the Pixel Game Engine was loading it, that filtering is chosen when the image is loaded for the first time. That doesn't apply so much in other platforms, so maybe we actually do need to have a flag in here somewhere that says use the filtered version. You know, that might be a nice thing to do, or the application can just filter them if it's necessary. Critter handles panning, zooming, and rotation. I've not used Critter, so I can't comment on that. Right, so let's look at some code for what's going on here. Now, at the moment, this is all just a big brain dump into Visual Studio. Very little effort has gone into consistency of naming with namespaces and file names and all that sort of thing. But it's grown a few arms and legs since the last episode. Let's start by looking at the log. Which is fairly boring, but it's a singleton. So, you know, thumbs up, singleton. Who likes big global singletons in the chat? Give us a shout out if you do. Custom properties per asset, so people can define their own options. Yes, so that's a good point. That is something I do intend to include. That almost everything will have some sort of customizability. But keep in mind, I'm not creating a game engine here as such, right? This is really just a way for me to create assets to be used by other games. I'm also very aware that I'm treading on the toes of like the tiled developers with some of these things too. So I don't want to just do a clone, and there's going to be some unique aspects to it too. First time chat from Joseph21 there. Thank you. Fan of Singleton here, yes. For those that don't know, Joseph21 has spent a lot of time recreating all of the console game engine applications and videos in Pixel Game Engine. So there's a link to his repo on the official OLC repo. If you're still into sort of CGE stuff, you can go and look at the more modern equivalents. And so a big shout out to Joseph. Thank you for that. It'd be nice if this was a little simpler. Well, do you know, that's one of the things. There's two things about tiled which I found troublesome, and that's not to give the devs a hard time about it. I've actually used it. I've used it quite a lot. It's a good tool. But yes, it's got a bit of a learning curve to it, and I don't like fundamentally. There's the concept of tile as an object. And we've discussed this on the Discord before. I'm not going to operate that way, but at the same time, I'm not going to restrict my environment to operating that way. I'd rather we have layers and property layers. That's just how my brain works when I'm assembling 2D worlds. Sometimes there will be things like objects in those, but if you've got sort of gigantic monolithic data structures that represent certain things in a level, I've always preferred them to be abstracted as layers. So you might have a background layer, a layer of walkable tiles, a layer of collision, a layer of transportation units, and within that you would have defined zones and regions, which could be polygons and things like that. So I tend to think a little bit differently about that. Any Java port? Sorry, I don't think so. You've not programmed enough to see the side effects of a singleton yet. You know, singletons are good. I get why people don't like them, but they do have their place. And if anything, the sort of ubiquitous example of a singleton being used is in a logging application. It's the one time you just want this big fat global variable just to be there that you throw data at, and it goes and sorts itself out. So good. Cypherpunk's there for layers over tiles. That's good. Single tile as an object sounds like overkill. I get why though, right? And there are situations where it is even more applicable. Let's say I've got the Mario coin spinning. That's an animation. So suddenly that's not just one tile. That's a whole sequence of tiles. Now, how do you handle that in a layered environment? My approach is going to be I'm going to have an animatable layer, which kind of expects tiles to have an animation property. I'm penciling some of this out and making some of it up as I go along, but the source of file manager of my compilers is also a huge singleton. Yeah, I guess a compiler can kind of be a singleton, right? You treat tile maps as bitmaps. Yeah, that's how I. So I think there's, everybody in this chat at least. It's not surprising. It's kind of like we all tend to find each other. It's a very old school way of thinking about describing certainly 2D information. Anyway, let's have a look at this logger. So I've basically got a struct. One of the things I wanted to make sure was that the log entries were persistent throughout the lifetime of the application, but they only exist in one place. I don't want duplication of the log, one in the background and then another in the GUI and things, and WX Widgets provides some tooling to help you do that. It also provides logs built in, but mine was a bit simpler. So it's got a single entry here. It's got a timestamp, the text, and what type. And that type can be interpreted as errors, debugs, warnings, whatever. Yes, I should probably use an enum class there. I'm coding for fun at the moment. I'll flesh all that sort of detail out. All the other ways are just wrong. Well, there's a nice balanced sort of grey area opinion from Magetsub, as we always expect. So this is a singleton because I have a function here which gets me an instance of this when it's created. And because I've got this static keyword within the function, this is the magic bit that makes it a singleton. So the very first time that this getLog function is called, it creates an instance of the logger. Any subsequent calls to this getLog function will just return that same instance. So that's why it becomes a singleton. You have to call this somewhere, and we'll see that scattered throughout the code, I've got several constructions that will call getLog. So there we go, Dan Destine. Yep. So it's good to have you and Magetsub in the chat. Totally, it's proper balance of opinions on the matter. In here, it's actually I've broadly made it somewhat thread safe. At the moment, that's not actually applicable to anything that I'm doing, but it's just convenient to have it that way. If there's messages there, any sort of interaction with the log, we'll use a mutex just to protect it. It doesn't really matter so much for my applications right now. You could make the static variable as thread local. Could? I get homework. First thing you see is singletons. Oh no. And I've created some utility functions. One is print. All of them just take strings, and all they do is they populate an entry structure here with a timestamp, the string that you've sent along, and set the type variable. They're just for convenience. The timestamp function does some trickery. Oh, you like this one? Look at this, huh? That's nice. So the timestamp function it just creates a string timestamp that's reasonably nice. And looking at this and the names for these sort of things, this looks like something I might have stolen from somewhere. I'm not so sure. It might be on the demo for one of these functions. But I had to suppress some warnings for Microsoft Visual Studio. It didn't like something here. Should add a comment for why that's suppressed and why it's okay. Why was it suppressed? Let's take it out. That's not the warning, by the way. That's my dodgy network setup. Might not see it now. Probably have to do like a full clean. I think it was suppressed because I can't remember what warning 4996. What was it? It was something about just using time. It's basically time was deprecated or something like that. It didn't like it. But I just couldn't face going into standard chrono. You need to get prepared for doing a bit of standard chrono. First time chat from Good Cheeseburgers. Doesn't MSV warn on all? Yeah, I think that was all it was. Yeah, it's not generated the warning this time. I'm going to put it back, but I'm actually compiling with a fairly verbose warning level 2 at the moment because I'm doing the PG3 dev. I'm trying to do it to be as quiet as possible when it's compiling. Sigma Heavy Industries. Oh, that's good to hear. Thank you. Appreciate that. Hello. Right. So that's the logger, and also you'll notice there's another fairly nasty design pattern which I'm very guilty of. It's all in a header file. It's a single file solution. I did actually create the CPP file, but there's nothing in it. Now, to accompany the logger, I then created a log list view. Now, we need to get a little bit WX widgety at some point because this is the thing that actually views the log. And it inherits from list control, but it's using a list control in an interesting way. So if you're familiar with list boxes, they're typically a window you can add strings to, and as you add more strings, you get a scroll bar and you can select things on them. They're great until you've got 10,000 things in that list box. Then they start to sort of fall down and grind to a halt. And so you don't want to do it that way. And the nice thing about the list control widget is it allows you to create something called a virtual list. So it essentially requires that you derive a class from it. And given a particular location in that list, return the appropriate information for it. And then that way, it only needs to sort of worry about what can be seen in the list at any one time. And you might think that that's really obvious, but that's just not how lists work, on Windows at least. Been watching me on YouTube. Nice to catch a stream. Oh, thank you. That's good. I know there's a lot of people thinking, oh, I've not seen any YouTube videos for a while. You're right, there haven't been any. But there's some planned. Don't worry, I've not gone away. But I thought I'd get back into the swing of things by doing some CodeZone. And it's also, it prompts me into actually doing some programming, which is nice. So I'm using this virtual list control because I expect the log could potentially have many entries, and you'll find similar approaches done in any tools like this. So quite a few text editors and things might work this way too, that you really only want to deal with what you can see on the screen at any one time. You don't need to have this huge bulk of data stored within the component itself, and that's why it was important that I have the logs stored externally to the GUI in this instance. So I have a list view. In fact, we can have a look at what happens in the list view. If you're not familiar with WX widgets, you might pick up a few things. List items in a view are defined as what you want them to look like. You can have something called a list item attribute. And yes, there's new keywords and deletes. Yeah, get over it. And the list item attribute allows you to set the background color, the foreground color, and the font. So that's how I managed to get that nice sort of red background when I loaded the incorrect file. In here, I just simply returned the item text. I did have something which tried to format it and display the timestamp and things, but then I just thought it's really too verbose. I'm keeping the code though in case I want it in the future. And at some point, I will add some custom properties to this that we can set these things up and make it a more versatile control. But at the moment, you know me, it's about getting it work and then making it pretty. Oh, hey, Speedy, hello. Good. Oh, good. I'm glad you made it, Speedy. Did your reminder application work for you? I probably set it half an hour too early. Speedy writes his own programs for accessibility reasons, and he's been showing me an application he's written that allows him to. It's basically a reminder app, but it keeps his online social life in check, I guess is the best way to put it. So at some point, the list control will request of my derived class what is at this particular location. So that is the basically row and column, and then what does it look like? And in this case, it's the whole row, not the individual item. Now I'm not using any font, any icons or fancy graphics or derived controls from that. So it's very simple, and that's it. So I now have a list control which can view hundreds and hundreds of thousands of items with no particular overhead to the GUI, which is quite nice. That whole thing sits in a window called a log viewer. And the log viewer is simply the thing that I can put on the screen. And you'll see here that it calls the instance of our singleton. Straight up, it just creates a local variable called log, which this class can then use to log messages, or indeed in this case, because it's the log viewer, interrogate the log to see what's there. So let's have a look how it's doing that. It's rather gross. It's using a timer and it's checking every 100 milliseconds. Has anything changed in the log? If it has, blast it out on the screen. That's it. That's all it does. I have a little response here to changing size because I I've now learned I don't need to do this. There's a better way to do it, but we can implement that later. Phil Boswell shuffles into a chat. That's a name I've not read on here for a long time. Online social life sounds like an oxymoron. Light-hearted to cheer up a dreary evening. What are we doing? We're no event bus, just a time. And the reason for that is I've built loggers before, all based on events, and you end up with this horrible spaghetti of code. And for what reason? What reason do you actually need such instantaneous display of log messages? I challenge you with that. So every 100 milliseconds, it looks and does like a bulk update if there's a lot of messages there. It actually has a small bug, this, because at the moment it doesn't do any checking to see have I scrolled to a different point in the list. And so if I try and scroll the list, it basically always goes back down to the bottom. So that's a bug that I need to fix. I was going to keep these things in a design document. So let's actually pull this up. So did you know, did you know that Visual Studio also has a live Markdown editor? Look at that, that's nice. So I was going to sort of store bugs and things to be fixed in this diagram. So when eventually this becomes a repo somewhere, it should all sort of be live. Better build a logger to debug the logger. Did you know if WX Widgets has plans to look more modern? Yeah, so Near Fahrenheit, we had a good discussion of this in the last episode. In brief, they don't. I kind of hope that they adopt some more modern back end for WX Widgets on Windows in particular. Its biggest problem is it uses the sort of native Win32 controls throughout. Now, Microsoft have said, look, we're not interested in supporting that anymore. Well, we'll support it, but we're not going to sort of add new stuff unless it's security related. And that includes sort of rather boring things like dark themes. So, that sort of thing is probably not going to come into WX Widgets, I don't think. What's your day job? I'm R&D manager for a small robotics company, and we service nuclear, aerospace, oil, and gas. Diego did some native Win32. He had to load in some DLL to make it look more like a Win. Yeah, it's by default now the Win32 stuff is old hat. A lot of the WX Widget stuff behind the scenes is actually not always using native controls anymore. They recreate them. It's tough. The latest, if you've ever had a look at sort of like things like the WinGUI 3 or WinRT environments now, which are thoroughly modern C++ programming environments, they're horrific. And I've just not got the time or inclination to go about learning them. You need sort of like Saladin and his mega ultra wide monitors just to even type out a variable. It turns out that the UIs look good on many platforms are really hard. Yeah, UI is hard. What is a native control? So native control is basically it's built into the operating system. It's a button. It's a text box that you enter. Now, almost everything you see on here will not be a native control anymore because it's stylized and it's got multiple functions and it needs to be rendered with hardware and that sort of thing. But if I run our little application, what did we change that means it needs to recompile? Can't remember. We'll see what happens when it runs. Ultra-wides have a use for modern C++. Certainly of all the namespaces you need. Do I have an experience of Qt? I don't know. Nobody seems to get with his polar opinion. I don't hate it. I just don't use it very much. And WX Widgets won for me. I always think that apps done in Qt you kind of know that they're done in Qt. There's something about them that make them look a bit Qt-ish. Right, there we go. So everything on here except for the notepad, I believe, is a native control. So there's absolutely nothing special about this button. This is the button that Windows provides. That's it. That's all the native control is. So if you want to actually make it look funky, if you wanted it to be rotated or do things like that, you can't, right? Because that's not how Windows provides the control natively. The advantage of using a native control is it's faster, it's there, it's guaranteed to behave a particular way. And WX Widgets doesn't emulate that many controls. So this button will be a C button on Windows or whatever it is, and on GTK it'll be a GTK button, and on Mac OS it's a Mac button. So it uses whatever is the native button, so you get the same look and feel. Unlike Java, where they tend to look like Java applications on every platform. At least they did back in the days of Swing anyway, showing my age here. Is Swing still a thing on Java? I have no idea. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, that's the thing, right? There is a certain feel to it. Some people like it, some people don't. The other thing is, I've been using WX widgets, certainly since 2003, 2004, even like in its very, very early days. And so I'm just familiar with it. So it's easy for me to actually construct what I need. And I'm never one for how things look. I just don't care. I'd rather it just be some functional tool. Right, so what I was going to say was we're going to keep some things in here that we need to fix. So bugs. Now, I don't actually know Markdown, even though I've just boasted there's a nice Markdown editor here. So let's have some bugs to fix. The first, what is Markdown for a dash? There we are, that's what we want. Oh, good. Yeah, see, it puts a bullet point in. So I know that the logger only views bottom line, which is a bit of a bug. That's no good. And I know that what was the other bug that we said we found to do with the log? Oh, I can't remember. But whilst I'm here, I do actually know there is a bug that makes it crash, and that is if I maximize the screen and move a sash window. Just before I forget to put that there, I'll have to fix that one later on. Let's see if I can make that bug actually happen. So the problem, that bug in particular, is if I maximize that and then pull that down, or something like that, and then go back to here, see how it's disappeared, and then if I try and resize that, oh, it's not doing it now. Ah, maybe I fixed it, I don't know. Tried making a Swing application a while ago. I started doing sort of Swing semi-professionally with, I think it was 1.2. Not a bug, but the mutex and container combination instead of a lock-free queue may become a bottleneck for... Yeah, it's not going to happen in my application, but yeah, okay, you're right. I think Markdown allows use of square as a checkbox. Oh, does it? Oh. Oh. I mean, if that was the case, it kind of needs to be interactive, right? I mean, obviously you can't check the Markdown and expect it to go back. It's with the space. No, I don't think the Visual Studio renderer is that clever. Oh, a dash in front. Right, so it's getting even more complicated. So dash. Oh, there we go. How do I do to put I put an X in it or something? Yeah, okay. Interesting. Learned something new tonight. Very good. Anyway, I bet many of you didn't know that it had a Markdown editor built right there into Visual Studio. I thought that was pretty cool when I found out. And then I started copying all sorts of Markdown I could find to see what it was capable of doing. I like that it also had emojis. Right. So we did say that we were going to get going with tile selection, but I don't think we're going to get that far. So what I'll do is instead I'll talk through how the asset manager is constructed and look at that. So this isn't an asset manager, and this is also now a proper... this is a bit of a code smell coming up that we'll talk about. And it's really designation of responsibilities. So in my framework, I have something which I'm constructing called a workspace. And this is what I intend to be the data model behind my application. This is really what you're working with. And all of the GUI is really just a way of interacting with and manipulating the data within this workspace. So at the moment, all I can do in my workspace is load assets. So I've got a vector of the assets, and that's stored here. At least it's in one place, and a workspace is created when the application starts up. So if I go to the main entry point, there we go. I make a workspace, and I pass it around to the things that care about having access to the workspace. Have you tried Dear ImGUI? I have, yep. It's not really sort of the right application, I think, for what I'm doing. I'm deliberately making sort of a Windows data handling application. First time chat from Trucker CTech as state transition. Don't know. That's obviously related to something, and I don't know what. Isn't VS just using Edge for that Markdown view? I don't know. It only came in on one of the more recent versions of Visual Studio. Anyway, so I've got my my workspace, and I pass that through to my asset manager. Now, this is a big question. A question open to the chat. Should I be loading the assets in my workspace class, or should I be delegating that to some random function in my GUI to go and do? And I think I know what the answer is going to be here. So right now, I have a workspace, but it can't do anything. All it does is store data. The GUI itself is actually doing the manipulation of that data. So it's really about designation of responsibilities. If I have a look at the Asset Manager class, just let's go to on new asset, for example. Sounds like a loaded question. This is going to start a war. Oh, here's that bug for WX widgets. That's what I was thinking of. We need to have a look at that. I'll come back to that in a minute. So if the user clicks the on add new asset button, tell you what, let's run it. Let's just show you what that does. So add new asset. We open up the file dialog, and we can add several different files. So let's add all of those four there, and it loads the assets ready for viewing. Now, that actual loading is quite involved. I've got to open the file, I've got to load in the byte data, I've got to interpret them as pixels, and I've got to go and create an asset on the GPU, because don't forget this is all hardware rendered. Once it's on the GPU, I've then got to maintain it on the GPU and get rid of it. Whose responsibility is it to do that? Right now, I've thrown it into this button. I can feel Danderstein sort of like breathing out down my neck. So the button itself is responsible for that task. It shouldn't be that way, and I think I know. The whole chat going, no, what are you doing? If it works, don't. Thank you, Magetz. Thank you. Yes, that's what I like to see. The button, right? So why is the button doing this? It's simply because, as I say, I'm writing this as I go along. I'm making it up as I go along without a plan, and this is the consequence of not having a sensible plan. And you end up with spaghetti code. But right now, I'm just feeling out sort of ideas and testing a few sort of more lower level things, such as the image display and how to actually work with file data. But you're right; it shouldn't be the button that does this. And why shouldn't it be the button that does this? Because I also have to have very similar code. There we go. So let's if we go up here, so this is the button being pressed. That's where it's loading the image. In fact, it's those three lines there. To load the image as an OLC sprite, and then it does some CPU to GPU transactions. But I also have exactly the same code in this button, right? Which is when you change the asset. So, you know, obviously we're starting to see some real code smells. Yeah, I guess you guys can actually smell this this code at home. Have you worked with C Sharp before? Is it better for Windows development? It depends. Very much depends. For me, not necessarily, because I can do this sort of stuff quite quickly. However, if I was to commission a new project now professionally, it probably would be a C Sharp application. Only simply because the dev tools and the resources are sort of heading in a way that makes it very rapid to develop applications for business, and that's more what I would be interested in doing. Excellent, Speedy. Thank you very much. So Speedy's put his clock app there in Show Your Stuff, which is a forum on our Discord server. Thinking about the state pattern, you see. Well, I guess I think the chat has made its, except for Magetub, has made its intentions clear here. I'm obviously going to get cancelled as a consequence of doing this, delegating this responsibility to the buttons. But it does raise an interesting question. Why do we actually need to separate it out to the workspace? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I'll hang my head in shame. I have no answer to that. But anyway, I found a bug with WX widgets, which was really frustrating actually. So there's a tool in WX widgets called not an open file dialog. It's the yes, it is an open file dialog. The open file dialog is the window when you click open file. Let me find where's my application. My application's gone missing. There we go. So this dialog here, this is completely self-contained. It's I've not coded any of it. It's what you've all seen whenever you want to open an application, and because it allows you to handle multiple files being added. I wanted to get the friendly names and the file paths. Now, if I only select one file, I get the file path and I get the file name, and it worked very well. But in this multiple file selection mode, all I get for both is the file paths. So WX widgets, there's a bug there. And I thought I was doing something wrong at first, but no, it really is the case that you just get the data duplicated. So I'm tempted to sort of delve in and try and repair that and submit a bug fix maybe. It doesn't actually look like a trivial bug either. It's certainly on the surface. I had a quick look on the GitHub repo for this particular part. I couldn't immediately see why it was behaving the way it does. The trouble is with a big project like this is actually there's about 5 layers of abstraction you've got to work your way through in order to get to the bottom. That's one of the arguments you'll hear, certainly from some faces in this chat, against sort of the object-oriented paradigm for doing GUIs. It can get very, very multi-layered. And we're going to be ended up doing the same thing, by the way, because a lot of my stuff that I've not talked about yet, how we actually render the graphics and how we do the display, is going to be sort of a base class being inherited from, abstracted from, and changed and manipulated. We'll try and avoid as many diamonds as possible, but they're always good fun to untangle. Signals and slots, yeah. So standard int there with his very sort of this is feet on the ground time. It's about ownership, and you're quite right. So I think I'll probably refactor the workspace to start actually including the things to manipulate the stuff as well. You see, it becomes then interesting if I've got this image assets vector and I want to start moving the images around with that move up and move down button. The only place in my entire program is when you click that move up and move down button. So is it just laziness that I'm not including a move up and move down function in here that those buttons call? But the right answer is it's ownership. Wait, what was the problem with the paths? The paths was I want the file name and I want the path. They're different, right? So the path is the full path from root to wherever it is, and the file name is just the blah.png. Because as a default friendly name, the file name is a good start, right? And get file names and get paths returns the same data, only for multiple selections. It doesn't do it for a single selection. It actually works for single selections. A first-time emoji from Krigsvin there. Pretty sure there's stuff in standard file system to do that. Yeah, there is. My approach was even better, Danderstein. You'll like this. My approach was to where is it? Ah, there we go. To use the WX string type and use its after last. Now, the best part is this won't work on Linux. Everything else here will work on Linux, but that bit won't. Yeah, I like the file system library too. I think it's actually a pretty good way to manipulate files. It was late last night when I was hacking this together. Sounds like most times I've tried to read somebody else's code base on GitHub. Yeah, it takes a bit of time to learn how to read code and sort of blank out all the stuff that doesn't matter. You do get a feel for it after a while. You got to roll your own split function. Does WX still make you define your own events? Yes and no. I mean, it's never made you do it, right? You can always use the events that exist, but if you want custom events, and I do, so actually, okay, I'll talk you a little bit of a bonus thing before we end today. So the graphics and things, it might be the bit you're all here to see. It's the only bit that we've not actually talked about at all. Now, I've created a base class called a GFX panel. Now, GFX panel inherits from something called a WXGL canvas. That's a built-in WX widgets tool. And all that does is give you sort of an access point to the OpenGL interface within the WX widgets framework. Whether it's OpenGL 3, 4, 1, whatever, it doesn't matter. It just gives you that immediate set of functions you need to get going with loading up OpenGL. And if I go to my GFX panel as an implementation, it's a window, so that's quite nice. It behaves and sizes and gets all of the window events you want. So things like mouse positions, keyboard shortcuts, all the scrolling around, all of that's handled. And you can use that to then manipulate your OpenGL interface. I've commandeered one of these panels to act as a pixel game engine interface. So what you're seeing rendered on the screen is actually PGE doing its thing, and this is a sort of an associative unit of control as well, called a context. And the context is really the hardware interface. So it's actually the context here is the PGE itself, sort of subtly disguised as something else. So you'll start to see this context. Depending on which part of PGE I want, I can call different functions from it. Now, this is a PGE 3 thing, so there's lots here that you probably won't have seen if you're familiar with PGE 2. Hang up. What's the difference between working on OpenGL and Linux? On Linux and in Windows? Nothing really. Loading up the functions, sometimes the names are a little bit different on Windows and on Mac and on Linux. It's just different across all of them. I have the impression that in Windows it's easier to use OpenGL. I don't think there's that much difference really. I mean, if we go actually have a look at what does the OpenGL stuff look like, where is it? OpenGL. Yeah, again, it's all header files for me. So the OpenGL stuff at the moment looks a bit like this. Now, I'm not creating any context or anything because the WX widgets environment has already handled that for me. So it's really just calling these functions, which are the same as the ones on Linux. They're just the OpenGL functions. So it's not too bad. Now this is for a 1.1 render. If you're using shaders and things, it looks a little different, but fundamentally it's not that difficult to do. We discussed in the last episode, I actually prefer DirectX as an approach to handling 3D graphics, but because I do actually want this to run on Linux, I'm limited. You need something like GLAD in Linux. No, you don't. Most people using OpenGL are using something like STL or GF since it's identical to Linux. Or they're using PGE these days, don't forget that. Never tried Scala. Yeah, it's all right. Anyway, I'm sort of drifting off track here. So I have this thing called the GFX panel, and we'll have a look at what's going on in this panel. So the panel has 3 functions: pre-render, render, and post-render. And these are designed to be implemented by some subcomponent, some subtype of this class. It's got functions in here which will handle the context and also do rendering in the correct order in sort of a PG-ish way. There's two modes for rendering as well. If you want to maintain the pixelated look in the window, there's a function for doing that. And if you want it to just absorb and be one-to-one screen pixels all the time, there's a way to render that too. So this graphics panel is sort of the fundamental access point to the Pixel Game Engine rendering system underneath. Now, from that graphics panel, the first thing that I've derived from it is something called a nav panel. And this adds interactivity to the panel. So the nav panel, you can see it inherits from this graphics panel, and it has functions to override all of these mouse commands, but also it gives you this ability to implement these three functions. Now, a nav panel, at the moment, the Pixel Game Engine is just a thing. It just exists. It allows you to draw stuff. But the nav panel allows you to move things around in that world. So if you're familiar with Pixel Game Engine 2 parlance, we had something called a transformed view. In Pixel Game Engine 3, that's absorbed now into the engine. Everything is subject to being rendered via a transformed view. So that's how you've got the ability to pan and zoom out of the box with no effort. And you can also rotate and skew. That's all. It's all built in now. It just runs it through this affine view class here. Again, all part of PGE3. So we've now got transforms. We've got views to describe how we want to interact with the transforms, and we've got all the standard vector stuff that we know and love. And so if we go to the nav panel implementation, now this is a big file simply because I've got loads of test code in here. So this is what I've been using to sort of develop PGE3. But things like middle mouse button responses, we wanted it to pan and zoom, so that's all implemented here. The user never needs to use any of this, because all the user needs to do is derive from nav panel. So for example, like a image viewer class does, which is what we're using to view the asset. So it inherits from here. All the image viewer needs to know is its local stuff. So what image am I drawing? As you can see, it's an OLC sprite. And what am I doing around it? Now, this reflects the data model, the state pattern that we were discussing earlier in the chat, that actually the GUI is purely an interface tool to talk to this data structure behind the scenes. So if I actually go and have a look at what's going on here, I load up a background image. It looks like a verbose way to load an image. This will sort of all be collapsed down into a single line for normal PGE use. It's a bit different here because I can manually control what I'm doing and where the data is at any given time. And I'm doing some drawing. So here on my onRender function for my image viewer, if I've got the transparency background, then I can draw a screen space textured quad over that whole background, which is the logo you saw. So I know there's some people that have probably just jumped in at the end here. So this OLC bit here, that's there to help me view transparency. Let's just find something with some transparency here. Yeah. Just a bit of texture to give you some contrast. So that's this logo pattern here in the background is what we're just drawing. We'll go back. That's this line here. So it takes the background sprite and draws it in screen space, which is quite nice. So that means it's not subject to any transforms that are in effect. And then I draw the image. If I'm choosing to show a boundary around the image, which I do, which is these two black rectangle, these two lines here, 1 pixel wide boundary around the whole image, I just draw the two rectangles with 1 pixel displacement between them. And you can see this should be beginning to look very familiar to anybody using Pixel Game Engine. It's very similar. And then I draw the image. Now, Pixel Game Engine 3, there's no difference between sprites and decals. Everything is hardware drawn. So I think that's a nice simplification. So actually drawing stuff in our editor is the easy bit. The hard bit is handling all of the user interface and the robustness and the scripting and the custom export types and the tooling and the intuitive user interfaces. All of that's the stuff that we need to get stuck into in future episodes. So let me just have a quick glance at the chat. How's it done without GLAD? Well, just look at the PGE, right? That doesn't use GLAD. You basically just need one function loaded up from a DLL to load the rest of OpenGL. GLAD's good, right? I mean, it's there to make things easy, but you don't need it. And question, what's the best way to write pixels to a screen? I usually use a quad and a texture, but I re-upload the... that's about it, right? That's the way. If you need to change the pixels all the time, that's exactly how Pixel Game Engine does it, and that runs very, very quickly indeed. Right. If anybody's got any suggestions for sending you all somewhere else, I think we're done for this week. Yeah, thank you, Speedy. I think the viewer does look good. I'm quite pleased with it. I'm also pleased with its robustness. Well, I say that now. Let's see if I can actually make it crash with something. Well, these were very large images. Avatars Mega Pack. Let's have a look. Sci-fi character icons, transparent. I don't know what I'm loading. Cool. I bet they look. Let's have a look at loading all of those in one go. You see, that's not bad. They're not huge images though, so it coped with that one. Maybe we should try some larger ones. Yeah, I'm really pleased with how this is coming together. It's a shame. I wonder if I've got anything that's like animated. Let's have a look. Just to see if the animation bit does actually work as I kind of hope it does. Because if you ever try to animate through images in Windows Explorer, it actually only loads about 5 images at a time, and then it has to stop and load more. So I wonder if I've got some RPG assets. Do I have anything that feels like it's animated as individual frames? That's the tricky bit, I think. Individual frames. PNG. Oh, PNG sequences. That sounds good. Let's have a look as idle blinking. Okay. Look. Open all of you. To idle blinking. Well, these are big images, 900 by 900. So if I should be able to just pan down there, you see, it can play the animation. Which I think, you know, is when you're making sort of creative decisions and you just want to see how things work. Yeah, quite like that. We'll have to solve the animation problem later on, I think. How much code was written in the stream? You should know by now. We write very, very little code in CodeZone. Right, so that is it. And I think I'm going to be hanging around on the Discord server just for a little bit. If you've not joined, come and have a look. Is there a way easy? Oh, hang on, big question at the end here. Is there an easy way to speed up emulation in your NES emulator? Don't run it in debug mode is probably the most obvious one. A lot of people fall foul of that. Can't you combine bulk of images while indexing in file name into animation strip or something? Possibly. These are all tools. I'm going to sort about. I think I'm going to have animated objects as something different as a concept. So in the there's a PegX, not a PegX, a utility file for Pixel Game Engine that handles animation now in what I feel is a conceptually intuitive way. I somehow need to make that exist in a GUI way to work with, because the animations can be either individual frames like this, or they can be sections within an overall tile sheet, and I think both are applicable. Yeah, sprite out. Yeah, we'll get all of these things sorted out. That's the kind of thing. It caps at 60 hertz. Well, that's because the NES is 60 hertz, right? You mean you actually just want to run it in super real time? Yeah, just take that cap out. It'll sound a bit squeaky. Because it sits there waiting for a specific amount of clock cycles to elapse before it then updates the physical display. So you just wait for... and I'm trying to go back in memory, it synchronizes that with the audio then, doesn't it? So the amount of audio samples that have gone through is actually what's dictating the speed of the emulator. So if you want it to go faster, then just clock it twice as fast. You're in control of that function. So yeah, it's not limited through processing. It's limited because it's meant to run at 60 hertz. Okay, right. That's enough. Thank you for watching today. I'll see you all on the Discord server in a bit. Take care. Bye-bye.